And it also reflects the breadth and depth of people and organisations that have contributed and support the core messages. So it's from circular economy experts to built environment practitioners, from insurers to financiers, from digital practitioners to academics and policymakers. And those contributions could have been through a one-to-one interview, through a workshop, or via feedback. And there are also umbrella organisations who have chosen to demonstrate their support by putting their logo on the website. And the website details will be available at the end of the presentation, and that's where you can download the document. So we began by asking everybody why, why does this matter? So the why section is split into two parts. So there's firstly why we need a circular economy, and that's because sort of after the World Circular Economy Forum, I must feel I don't need to say this, but for those of you that weren't at WCEF, our economic model and ways of living currently exceed the limits of our finite planet. So we need to adapt our economy, society and built environment to operate within them. And a circular economy creates a more resilient system that encourages sort of innovation and therefore value for money, and durability and therefore no, the other way around. Innovation, which therefore significant commercial opportunities for us, and then durability and therefore value for money. But ultimately, the cost will be even greater if we fail to change, because we'll pay through the loss of natural capital and ecosystem services, so things like bees cross-pollinating, or the effects of climate change like flooding and forest fires. And then secondly, why we're focusing on the built environment. So basically, it has a huge impact on our planet, and therefore that means that we have a huge responsibility to limit its impact. So half of global carbon emissions come from the built environment, and it will be near impossible to achieve our net zero targets unless we transition to a circular economy. However, on the positive side, there's also a massive opportunity because of its size and longevity. So other sectors have directed the circular economy efforts towards the way that they use materials and products. But what you can see in this diagram is that we can go further by pursuing the greatest value from the use of assets, which can last hundreds and thousands of years, and systems as well. So we wanted a short and simple definition that can be used by everyone, whether they're a circular economy expert or not, including boards and governments, so to help with decision making. So our shared understanding is that the circular economy is about enabling people and nature to flourish within our planet's capacity to provide resources and handle waste. And it means getting the greatest possible value from the use of materials, products, assets and systems in the built environment. And crucially, that value is defined by the social, environmental and economic outcomes we gain from the built and natural environments, so not just monetary value. And the rest of the document then dives down into a bit more detail on outcomes, systems and economics, and finally transformation and how we can achieve the transition. So this is the what in a visual form. And many of you will recognise this. Visual is based on the butterfly diagram of both Cradle to Cradle and the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, because it's really important to say that we were not trying to reinvent the wheel. So what we're trying to do is define what does the butterfly diagram mean specifically in the context of the built environment. So the first section is on outcomes, recalling our vision and kind of bringing the two documents together. So the three main principles are that we need to maximise value through use. So in order to get more value, measured through the achievement of outcomes, we need to keep the materials, products, assets and systems that make up the built environment in optimal use for as long as possible. So that includes getting more value from existing buildings and infrastructure, refurbishment and repurposing, and redeploying products and materials where they will deliver value through reuse or recycling. And this means that we can start to see the built environment as an alternative source of materials to nature. And conversely, we need to recognise that nature is a provider of vital services, not just a source of materials, which leads me on to the next principle, and that's that we need to work with nature. So by giving more recognition to the fact that nature provides vital services and has its own natural circular economy, We can start to adopt more regenerative practices, so learning from and mimicking natural cycles, switching to well-managed renewable natural materials, and using nature-based solutions. And the final principle is that we need to focus on better outcomes for people and nature. So what the diagram is illustrating is that it's the services from our built and natural environments that enable people and nature to flourish. Nature, because people cannot flourish if nature does not flourish. And in fact, people are part of nature. And nature has the right to flourish for its own sake, not just to provide services for people. So the first principle in systems is that we need to change the whole system. So the built environment is a complex system that is inextricably linked with natural cycle and social and economic models. So for any circular economy interventions on the built environment, we need to adopt a systems-based approach because an intervention in one part of the system could have a consequence in another. But the good news is that this means that transitioning to a circular economy will have a substantial impact on dealing with our other global systemic challenges. So like achieving net zero emissions, providing climate resilience, protecting biodiversity, and enabling social equity. And we cannot achieve any of this unless we make the most of data and digital approaches. So when we talk about taking a systems approach, it can sound very complicated and we don't know where to start, we don't know how to manage it. So digitalisation can help us to address the scale and the complexity of the interconnected systems and support us to make better decisions faster. And connected digital twins, like Credo, the climate resilience demonstrator, can help us to intervene more effectively. And data infrastructure, which enables that secure flow across organisations and sector boundaries, will allow us to manage stocks and flows in a new and more circular way. So that will help us to understand, for example, the location and condition of our materials and products and enabling their movement to where they're most required. And the final principle is about combining systems thinking and design thinking. So systems thinking to facilitate the flow of materials, energy and information across silos, and design thinking to deliver higher value in use and make assets longer lasting and easier to adapt, maintain, reuse and recycle. So this visual takes Kate Rayworth's donut economics diagram and the planetary boundaries framework and puts circular economy in the built environment at the heart. So to achieve this just and safe space for humanity, we need to decouple economic activity from finite resource use and restore and regenerate renewable resources. And the price of materials needs to reflect their true environmental and social costs by including externalities in order to make the circular economy business models, therefore, the more logical option. And to help move us forward, we need to develop metrics that work for the circular economy, that align with the real needs of people and nature. So basically, we're not well served at the moment by our current focus on growth in GDP alone, as it inevitably incentivises us to exceed the planetary boundaries. And finally, we need to align economic, financing, business and procurement models, so moving away from our current unsustainable models towards sustainable, integrated and aligned ones. And the final section is on transformation and touches on the how. However, it's really important to understand that this section is not an action plan or a list of recommendations. So there's lots of fantastic initiatives out there. We've signposted some of them on the website. You've heard many of them this morning. The past 2 days at the World Circular Economy Forum, there's lots of amazing stuff out there. Our shared understanding is a summary of the concepts and principles that we agree will inform, guide and align the policies, strategies and initiatives that will drive the transition to circular economy. So this is the point where I now hand over to you, because each of us has to choose positive change and each of us must choose to act and make change happen in the parts of the built environment where we have influence and control. And we need to pull together to make a circular economy in the built environment become mainstream. And this has to be more than talk. And I think we heard that from a lot of the youth people that at the World Circular Economy Forum. We need to take collective action, as this cannot be achieved by individual organisations acting alone. So we need to ensure that the interventions that we collectively make in our built and natural systems lead to better outcomes for people and nature. That leads us back in a circular manner to where we started with our vision for the built environment. And finally, we need to embrace global diversity and share learning. So distinct solutions will be needed in different parts of the world, and great learning is going to emerge. So we must share it to move faster and further together. And with that, I'm going to hand back to you, Mark.
Thank you very much, Melissa. That was absolutely fantastic. I mean, I had a little bit of a job that I was going to follow up from Melissa and going to fill in a few bits, but Melissa's gone and done everything, and I think she's done it so well that I really don't have to add anything. So really all I'll do is just emphasise a couple of points, maybe 3 points. The first one is this thing that we all know, that it's time for a circular economy to be mainstreamed in the built environment. So it has to kind of become front and centre and something that everybody does, and not the activity of some specialists. So this is up to us now to get it to be mainstream. It's time. And I think a key part of that means that we do need to bring together the communities, because I've seen over the last couple of days an amazing community of experts in the circular economy. And the thinking is getting so advanced now. This is really, really good stuff on a very solid ground. This is real. But also, I've got decades of experience in the built environment as a built environment practitioner. And I kind of know that they're different communities. We have to bring the communities together. And so one of the key things that our shared understanding is trying to do is to make that kind of intersection in the Venn diagram bigger, so that the overlap is bigger, and present the circular economy in a way which is completely understandable and pick-upable, if that's a word, in the built environment. And I think part of that means it needs to be simple. And maybe one of the things which I've observed in working on this document is that interfacing with the circular environment community, they say, that's very simple. We know more than that. We've known more than that for 10 years. And that's true. But the built environment community hasn't. And so what we need is this intersection where we're speaking the same language. And I heard that message coming out again and again earlier on. So let's speak that same language. And I think that's the reason why it needs to be our shared understanding. And as Melissa said, the our in our shared understanding is all of us. We need to share this shared understanding. So that was one point I just wanted to emphasize. The other really key one for me is this kind of additional thinking that the built environment gives. Because again, by observation, I see that in the circular environment community, there's been a lot of focus and a lot of development of thinking around maximizing the value of use of materials and products. And rightly so, it's incredibly important. But one of the things which the built environment thinking gives us is to see that it's not just materials and products, there's also assets and systems. And if we see that bigger picture of maximizing the value of use of materials, products, assets, and systems, then we've got a bigger picture that is really worth going for. And one of the key reasons I believe that is because if we look at the value of use of the infrastructure and built environment assets, that is the same thing as the outcomes. And so I think it's really important for us to kind of add into the lexicon of circular economy thinking the language of outcomes, because that's what we're aiming for, better outcomes for people and nature. And you get those outcomes from better use of the systems. So let's kind of get our heads around this and think of all of those things, materials, products, assets, and systems, because then when we maximize the value of use, what we'll be doing is delivering better outcomes. We all win. This is a very good big picture story. So that was the other one thing I wanted to emphasize, which now leads on perfectly, I think, to introducing our panel, which I will do very briefly, and inviting Martijn and Kira and Anna to come up and join here. I'm going to sit down with you. And yeah, please come up. Yeah, just all come. And I think what would be really good is once you arrange yourselves, and it doesn't matter which order you go in, we'll just kind of come down the row. And if you introduce yourself, but then also kind of what you think, having heard what Melissa said, having read the paper, what does this mean to you in the community that you sit in? Just kind of, what are your thoughts? And we're kind of imagining that this will be relatively quick, in about 4 minutes each, but then we'll come back round and have a conversation. So, Anna, would you like to kick off?
Yes. Thank you very much. I'm Anna Quintas. I'm lead built environment at the Cradle to Cradle Products Innovation Institute. I'm based in Amsterdam in the Netherlands, but I work with a global community of manufacturers certifying their products with a Cradle to Cradle certified program. I think Mark and Melissa, you already said a lot, but I think my first remark is a big thank you for both of you for this huge collaboration exercise. And we heard over the last 2 days how important collaboration is to address this transition in the circular economy. Mark, you mentioned something that is quite important, that is to keep it simple. And I think we also need to kind of focus on that we know built environment is complex. We know circular economy can become a bit overwhelming when we're talking about professionals, especially young professionals coming to this place. So we need to keep it really simple, but in a way that is also practical and also takes some actions. And I think what is important about this publication, about this our shared understanding, is also that it will help the built environment industry that by default is very traditional, to be convinced that it needs to be something more that we can do. And we know the built environment industry, it normally needs time to accept the change, but also needs understanding and needs knowledge to take the actions. And I think this document will help us with that a lot. In terms of the circular economy, a few months ago, someone told me that she could make a stronger business case when she focused on the economy word rather than the circular. And then it was easier to communicate to the different stakeholders, to the different actors in this value chain. And then a last remark in terms of what you already mentioned about what is the built environment community, what is the circular economy thinkers, and working with over 300 manufacturers globally. I understand that these are the front runners, but these are also the organizations, manufacturers that sometimes are not brought to these conversations, or for some reasons they don't engage as we would like. And you mentioned products and materials, but we know that systems are much more complex, and we need to really bring everyone together to this conversation. Just one final word for the supply chain, for the value chains that are also, they also need to be engaged in this conversation. And there's still lots of work to do in terms of data disclosure and in terms of understanding why they need to be engaged and not to be afraid to change. And I think that's quite important. Again, thank you very much. Amazing work. And I hope that young professionals, but also new professionals coming on board now can use this document as a starting point from now on.
Thank you very much. I mean, I think as you're saying that, it's kind of reminding me that we have agency in this. That is something that we all have. We can all do something. And you're right, the young professionals, supply chain you're talking about, they've got 300 manufacturers that are leading. We all have a part to play. So thank you. Kira.
Yes, thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Kira Crow-Pedersen. I'm here representing the African Circular Economy Network. We are if you aren't familiar with us, network of over, I think, close to 40 countries now, representing 500 members across the continent of Africa. Basically, the intention is to create kind of a cohesive bond of how we approach the transition to a circular economy on the continent. I am based in Johannesburg, and I'm kind of in the ASIN headquarters team, and we, are here to push that agenda, as it were. I mean, first of all, to echo what Anna said, thank you everyone for the work on this project. It seems amazing. I'm really happy to be a part of it on this panel. I think in the context of ASIN, but also more broadly the Global South, perhaps, the challenge of the built environment actually, as with a lot of circular economy, comes around like maybe the idea of like horizon timelines on what the interim problem is now and how we address some of the problems in our current built environment in terms of infrastructure challenges, but also in terms of the waste that we encounter on the continent that isn't rather from us. Like I think the broadest challenge in the Global South is that we're dealing with consistently and overwhelmingly problems that aren't created by us, but we kind of have to come up against in a day-to-day environment, even in terms of waste management and other challenges like that. Then kind of looking a little bit further into the future, what the regenerative capacity that we have on the continent in the Global South is available to us. And that often means looking back in terms of what more traditional and ecological knowledge practices are, and how we can engage with those to really look at what the future of the continent might look like in a more circular way. So I think it's kind of a blend, and I think the report does an amazing job of this, of looking at maybe, or I think even Melissa's LinkedIn post this morning was maybe even accepting a little bit of pessimism or realism about the challenges that we have on the continent, and then also reflecting maybe in a more optimistic way of how we can use all of the tools and the understanding and thinking that we have available to us now to create a future that looks kind of good for everyone and good for us all. Yeah, I think that's the broad strokes.
Very good. I think we might come back in the Fireside chat to talk about this, that balance between realism and optimism. I think that's a key balance, isn't it? And particularly when you look at the challenges in the Global South, like you say. So let's come back to that one.
Sure.
Thank you. You put a nice little flag in for that.
Mm-hmm.
And Martijn, an introduction. Off you go.
Oh.
Yes.
So Martijn Lopez Cardozo, I'm the CEO of an organization called Circle Economy. I think many of you know us. We also were in the previous sessions on the built environment, but we're mostly well known for our circularity gap report. So I think a lot has been said. So let me try to sort of pick out a couple elements. So I think what I liked about actually when you first approached me, Mark, we already actually in the middle of another project that was presented before, the Circular Building Coalition. And one of the things that was actually on our roadmap for the Circular Building Coalition was to have a shared understanding as to the circular economy. And so your call was actually at a really good time. So I figured, like, if there's already a group working on it, but let's not, try to replicate it. And that's, why I think you're here, and I think why we got this initial collaboration. And, I think we're at the early stages, so let's see how it evolves. But I think if we can bring those two things together, I think we avoid fragmentation and indeed have a, shared understanding. What I liked about the document, I think it's succinct, it's well structured, and it's well researched. So not trying to reinvent the wheel, but leveraging. I saw our circularity gap report thinking coming back. I saw the butterfly coming back. I saw Kate's donut coming back. So I think we're bringing together a lot of elements, and therefore also will create a bit of a, will help in getting the communities on board, because they also recognize quite a bit of their work in what you're presenting here, and I think they'll be helpful. So I have 3 comments and 1 question for the group. My first comment, and I think you made that as well, I think there was like this word cloud, what was important for circular economy at WCEF, and it was like collaboration was the big one. But to me, it's always a bit of a word is like, we should collaborate more. It's like, who disagrees, right? Mm-hmm. Or like similar in your organization, if you say, we should do better communication. Anybody against that? Mm-hmm. But what it really does, what does it take to collaborate? And I think the key thing is, the first thing in order to collaborate is knowing where you're going. Because if you're all heading in the same direction, that makes collaboration much more easier. And I think that's really helpful for this exercise, because it does define, albeit at a high level, right? Quite holistically, where do we want to go and where do we want to be? The second comment I would make is if you take the topic of collaboration, I think there's quite a bit in your document where you take inspiration from nature. And just an example, I think it was recently researched that there's actually way more collaboration in nature than we think there is, right? We always feel like, one animal is eating the other one, and that's sort of very Darwinistic approach. But it's actually trees communicate underneath, they're fungi, there's all kinds of feedback mechanisms. Which brings me to the third point, which is systems design thinking. And I really like that sort of a thread for it. And in particular, I like your broad scope. Because I think what we've seen a lot is at the beginning of a project, people say, let's look at residential housing, right? And then that's the scope, and everything out of the scope is not considered. And you really take a more holistic approach here, because you cannot really detach one segment of the built environment with the other surrounding buildings, with the infrastructure, how it's embedded in the landscape. And I really like your more holistic system thinking approach. And my question, and I think you posed it already a bit as well, Mark, is I think the title of the session is, or shared understanding. And I think it's actually more we're sharing or understanding. Because I think I saw like about 100 names. I know there are a million people watching this broadcast, so they'll hear from it. But I think the key challenge really is, there's probably a whole bunch of shared understandings out there. How do we make this truly shared?
That is a brilliant question to kick off our conversation. So should we invite Melissa back in? There's a seat for you, Melissa. And since Martijn has asked the question and you've just arrived, do you want to start by trying to answer it? What do you reckon?
I'd love to do that. No, I think it's the question. It's a brilliant question. But I think part of that question, the answer starts today. So even the way that we publish this is that as well as the millions of people that are online, there are millions of people across all of social media and using their organisations that are raising awareness. But importantly, they're not just raising awareness about our shared understanding. They're then using that to raise awareness of all of the initiatives that they're doing. And as I say, we've just had the World Circular Economy Forum as well. And so it's just, if our objective is to make this mainstream, then it's just to keep raising awareness of all the different initiatives that are going on and getting them to the right people. So I kind of mentioned boards and governments, rather than it being that one person in the organisation who's got like the job title, circular economy or carbon or something. And then the second thing is that I think it's regional. So I think the idea, as you said, is that we've got now the direction, and then people need to pick it up in each country. So loads of people have already reached out to us to say, in my country or in my sector or in my company, I'm now going to do that. So it's kind of a network thing. I see it kind of growing like that through going out.
So I'd be really interested to hear what you, Anna, and Kira think on this question. So I'll just give you a few moments to think, because it'll come your way. One thought just before I do is that in my mind, a shared understanding cannot be kind of forced from the top down. It cannot kind of be handed down from on high and everyone told that's your understanding, you've got to share it. But, that is not a shared understanding. To my mind, the shared understanding has to be something that grows and is much more organic. And I like your kind of analogy actually with nature and how connected things are. And yes, I don't think that we want to have one organization eating another and saying, I'm the boss. What we need is more connection. So what I would really hope for what I think is a good beginning with our shared understanding is that it can grow. And that it would genuinely become a shared understanding, not something forced on people. So if that is kind of the model, I wonder, in this group, can we talk about how to make that happen, how it can be a genuine shared understanding rather than a forced one? So that's just my view. But Anna, what do you reckon?
Well, the first word that comes to my mind is to be humble, because I think what we see in the market as well, is the same idea trying to be done or delivered by different organizations, and that doesn't help anyone, especially if you think about the boards and governments that sometimes they just need guidance to take actions, and then suddenly you have like 7, 10, 20 different solutions for the same problem. So, and also about the learnings that if some already did all this journey, why do we need to do it again? And that is about like sharing. It's about being humble enough to say, okay, I will learn from what has been done. I might need to adjust depending where I am doing my project, where I am performing a building or doing a building, but also like, can I learn, adjust, and try even to do better without need to reinvent again? And unfortunately, what I see a lot is like, especially with different funds, with different governments, everyone is trying to do the same several times. And then, of course, the learning takes time. And then if we want to scale it up, we just need to go straight to the point and try to be as more efficient as possible. So.
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, and as you're talking there, I'm kind of imagining that there is an element of wanting to be the boss, yeah, that sounds very much like an old economy, you know, hierarchical and wanting to say that I'm better than you are and a zero-sum game.
The first one.
Exactly, or even if you've done something very good, I'm going to ignore it and do something better. I mean, that to me does feel very old economy. Whereas I think if we're talking about circular economy, then we can imagine a better way of working together, which would be more humble, as you say. Kira, what do you reckon?
Yeah, I mean, completely agreed. I think maybe something that came up while each of my colleagues were speaking was maybe also representing like the network governance model as we understand it, and that kind of term has come up a lot over the past few days. But I think in reality, and what more meaningfully, almost, it is just a mimicry of how systems work in nature as well. I mean, we can look at, even in the built environment, if you look to urban metabolism, if you look at how the actual network system works, we can truly like mimic that, not just in terms of how we collaborate, but also how we look at the materials and systems and buildings that we rely on for, and infrastructure that we rely on for existing and living, and kind of looking again, reiterating the systems and design-based thinking of how we kind of move through the world.
So, Martijn, you've heard a few answers or beginning of answers to your question. Do they start to scratch the itch? Do they start to answer the question? So I'm asking you that, but also what I would like to do is come back to what Kira said earlier on, this balance between realism and optimism, because I think there's something very real about this, isn't there? And we have to be hopeful, we have to be optimistic, because otherwise we won't aim for something better. But then also we have to, I think, be realistic about the challenges. So is there an element of this realism versus optimism thing also in the answer to the question? So I'm asking you two things. I hope that's okay.
Yeah, I'm thinking how I can reconcile those two things. So maybe pick up on your topic. Indeed, I think like people want to be optimistic and people want to feel they have agency, right? So I think what we see a lot in this space is people feel they cannot influence their own future. And, you know, we have to work in the field, but you always get depressing news and like, you know, what you do, does it actually matter? And does it solve this very big problem? And I think I'm also thinking very practically. It's like, I think a lot of people can actually use these type of things if you can give it real value proposition or utility, right? So, and I'm now going from maybe a very high level, but this is like a great thing, but like, how often have people, you know, you have to give a presentation on a topic and you have to maybe start off with a higher level, what is this about? What is our shared understanding of the built environment? So, you know, not just have a PDF document, but also have, you know, associated narrative, free things, a little PowerPoint slide deck. So give people a lot of practical ways how they can integrate it in their work and feel they actually can use it and provide utility in their day-to-day. We actually started with the circularity gap report, which is, very rudimentary level, but it provided a lot of people with the ability to start a presentation with the world is only 9% circular and here's how you think about it and there are 4 systems, and like gave people a little bit of ways to address a very big and hairy thing. So that's the first. And if you continue that thinking a little bit, is how can you actually build from what you have into something which is, a bit more of a living organism as opposed to a PDF, right? So the PDF is pretty the most dead document. You cannot edit it, you cannot do anything with it. And how can you get closer to the living organism where people can add and contribute, and it becomes a bit more, there's comment and interaction, which I think brings me to the last point is where is this going to live, right? I think you guys did an amazing job. But at some point, imagine all the million people are starting to want to engage. What will happen, right? And how can we actually engage with those people? And so we have to find some type of platform so it actually can land and it can grow and can build, and we can facilitate that.
So can I reflect back to you some of the things which I've heard, which I find actually quite inspiring, and I hope that they would be inspiring to others. I mean, for me, one of the key things is about having a destination, having a vision of a better place that we want to get to. And I think, Martijn, in your introduction, you were talking about that, because if we have that, and there's an element of it being shared, then we can pull together towards that better place. And that's the thing that enables collaboration, like you said. And that rings very true to me. And it seems a very practical approach to collaboration. It's collaborating around a shared vision, a destination that we all want. Another thing which I find quite inspiring about this, which each of us have kind of talked in a different way, is the agency point, that we all do have a part to play. It might be a small bit, but we've got a part to play. And when we bring that together, we can make a big difference. And I think that, for me anyway, is part of the answer, Kira, to this realism, optimism thing. It's that there is a reality that we each face, but if we have agency, then we can work together, and working together is this collaboration towards a shared goal. Anyway, moving on from that, and I'm looking at the time and thinking we should ask for some questions from the audience. I'm just going to give you a little bit of a forewarning, is that once we've done some of these questions from the audience, I'm going to come to each of you and ask basically 2 things. One is on the realism point. What is the big reality that you think we're facing that needs to be addressed? And I'm going to ask you one on the optimism point, which is what are you hoping for that will make the difference? So it's almost like a barrier and an enabler type of question. But on the optimism one, be as optimistic as you like. Okay, audience, have you heard anything that you like? Have you heard anything you don't like that you'd like to question? Be very interested in your thoughts. So comments or questions. And we'll go online as well if there's anything coming
Yes,
up.
there are questions online.
Okay, great.
Yeah, we have a question around like how, I mean, you could collaborate, you work together, but how can you push power onto politicians and NGOs and we have the case in Germany right now, they're just pushing into one lecture on the eating system. How can you push back and say, okay, we want to open technology and we want to collaborate?
It's a great question.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's always a great question, isn't it? How do we get this to politicians? Any thoughts? I've got a thought. Melissa.
Well, I was just going to say, I think part of it is using language that they understand. And I think that's the same for the board as well. So if I take an analogy, say with digital, we found if you talk digital speak, then the board don't understand. But if you can translate it into board language, then that'll sort of help. And so with governments, I think it's about trying to find the words that work for them, and also trying to show, I think Martijn said it as well, it's the help them to achieve what they want to achieve. So, for example, like if there's a hook at the moment, it's that there's legislation on net zero, And so everybody's talking about that. And so if you can say, well, you're not going to reach net zero targets unless you adopt circular economy, then they can understand that and they say, oh, right, okay then. And so I think it's finding the words that work for them and keeping it simple, as we've said so many times.
Any other tips?
Scale, I think it always help. I mean, alone sometimes it's more difficult. So if you find your peers, if you find your stakeholders, your friends, let's say, and together make a louder voice, I think it also helps. But it really depends on what you have to say to them as well. But hopefully, more will be. It's going to be better.
So the thing I was going to add into that, which actually relates to what you said about the language and the scale, is that I think what I observe is that if we wait for politicians to lead, we'll be waiting for a long time. But what does seem to happen is that if something is becoming real and it's starting to be interesting and exciting, then politicians will pay attention. And then they will do something, and then they will lead. And so I think that part of this is, who moves first. And to my mind, if there's a kind of a critical mass of us, of we the people, demand a circular economy because we know it's best for people and nature, politicians will pay attention, and then it will be their idea. But then it will happen. So I think that there is something about who leads and who follows. And to my mind, politicians are very aware of the kind of the movement that is going on, and they will pick up on a movement and they will respond. But if we wait for them to start it, it won't happen.
Question about language. You gave a definition of circular economy. How did you come up with this definition?
So we spoke to a lot of people. So we've named it the gobstopper method. And gobstopper is a sweep that has a lot of layers, as you suck it. So at the very, very centre of that, we did one-to-one interviews. So we approached people that are thought to be global experts in the circular economy in the built environment area, and we did that through recommendations. So people saying these are the people that know. So that was just to get some really basic bullet points. And then when we got the really basic bullet points, we then went to the next sort of layer and sort of spoke to them, and we started to do things like workshops, and we started to refine those concepts. And then, as I said, at a certain point, we didn't really start to hear new ones as well. So we'd say that might be saying it in a different way or a different angle, but it was definitely like still the same points. And then we would think, okay, we've got the core points. And then it became much more about paragraphs, sentences, and words. And I'm not exaggerating to say that you can change a word and then it works for an entire sector, or the opposite. Like if you put a word in, they're like, well, we can't accept that if you put that in because it doesn't work for us. So really what the exercise was just trying to make it shared. And if anyone said, like, we can't sign up to this, then we'd say, right, talk to us about it. Like, what? Tell us exactly what it is that you can't see now, and we'll see if we can do that. So so that's where the words came from over, say, like 18 months, maybe.
Yeah, it was that one. And just a couple of words, because I think we probably should go to some questions online. I'll just very briefly in that case, when it comes to those 3 points which kind of help to describe what we are meaning by circular economy in the built environment, there are really 3 things. That one was a very high level view, which was the kind of the planetary boundaries view, and that's saying that has to be a part of defining circular economy, but it's very, very big picture.
And very abstract.
Very abstract. So the next sentence becomes much more kind of down in the detail, which is talking about the materials and products and assets and systems, and saying that we've got to actually maximize the value of use. That is the essence of it, but it fits with the big picture view. There are two points, big and small. And then the third one is about defining what we mean by value. Because if we say we want to maximize the value of use, we need to say, what do we mean by value? And what we think we collectively mean by value is actually the value in outcomes. Because if it doesn't lead to better outcomes for people and nature, then it probably wasn't a good outcome. It wasn't a good definition of value. So that it's got those three elements, and I hope you like it. But let's go to the questions online.
Okay, this question gets repeated. So what incentives are out there to boost and encourage the adoption of circular economy in the built environment? And this question as well, so that one about the incentives and what are the KPIs and metrics for measuring success of the adoption?
Thank you. It's a good question, and it sounds exactly your kind of question, Martijn. What do you reckon? What about KPIs? How might you go about measuring circular economy?
Yeah, I mean, I think we could spend the whole separate a section on it. And in fact, we are leading the metrics and indicator work together with the World Resource Institute as part of the platform for accelerating the circular economy. And it's still, though there's a lot of work being done, it's also not part of the framework of the EU. It's still, at a fairly early stage. But I'll maybe take a bit more of a controversial answer to this question, because to me, this is also maybe also answer your question you're going to ask in terms of the barriers. What we often find is we're in these type of conversations and we're trying to sort of create a common narrative and North Star, and you quickly then get into, okay, but how do we now exactly measure it, and how does it differ per sector? And then you sort of very quickly get into very nitty-gritty conversation in terms of, hey, but the carbon we can measure in one metric, CO2 reduction. What is one single metric for the circular economy? And I feel it's a little bit of a trap because then you suddenly go, and metrics are never perfect, right? And there's 100 examples where you do not work. And then you find yourself in that conversation. I'm not saying it's not important, but I think we need to also fix the narrative and the common understanding and get that right. While we're also tackling the metrics conversation.
Very good, and that was very neat actually to move into the kind of the next section, the final section of us just sharing these 2 points. So you've already done your realism point. So we'll go back that way because I think that will be fair. Finish with Melissa. So what's your optimism point? What is a sign of hope in all of this?
Well, I mean, I think we just attended the World Circular Economy Forum, and I've been around. I was running a circular economy scale up before and attending, and now from an NGO's perspective. And what I found interesting, actually, this was the first time where I felt that the circular economy bubble is bursting. For instance, we had the sort of the VP who was quite high level from the EIB showed up, and I met him at the dinner before. And he basically said, tell me about circular economy. I have to be here and I have to give a keynote tomorrow. And I know we do a little bit and I did some reading now. So we suddenly see other people coming to this group. And of course, it's a big reunion and we all see each other again each year and it's great. Now I feel it's opening up. And I think that's exactly what we need. And that's also why I'm so excited about the initiative, because people find it still very, very challenging about the circular economy. And as a result, they don't really feel welcome. They feel they're sort of joining like a sort of church or sect with all kinds of narratives and difficult words. And that we're scaring them away. And I think we should be welcoming in. And the welcoming message should be simple, understandable, and inspirational.
Yes. So if it's church, I can say amen to that. So Kira, your realism point, what's the kind of like a real thing that you want to address, and your optimism point, the thing that gives you hope?
Yeah, I mean, I think that maybe my realism point is just going to be recalling what I said a little bit earlier, which is that there's like just this absolutely mammoth amount of challenge that we've faced, again, globally, but it does feel a little bit more viscerally kind of day to day on the African continent of just what do we do with. I know like circular economy is not a recycling program. We can say that over and over again, but there is initially this massive hurdle of waste and material challenges in terms of the wrong use and overuse of materials, in terms of the waste that arrives on the continent and how we get over that initial hurdle to then become optimistic. I think that's kind of the realism point. On the optimism point though, I think that Africa and the global south pose a massive opportunity for the circular economy. They are urbanizing, they are young. It's, yeah, incredibly inspirational to be able to work on that space. And incredibly inspirational to like kind of have almost blank canvas sometimes of thinking about what the future might look like. It's scary, but it is, you know, this, yeah, massive opportunity for growth and development.
Excellent. That does feel optimistic. So Anna, your realism, your optimism.
On the realistic point, I will say that it is okay not to be okay as well. And I think we need more and more in the market the stories about the non-success so people can learn with that. And I think, of course, an organization will never likes to tell what went badly or what went wrong, but because it's a journey and because we are all on this journey with the learnings and the shared understanding, it is important to learn as well with things that doesn't work. And to be honest, to be realistic, we know that a few things will not work. It just needs to be completely honest on that. On the other side of the optimist, circular economy is not a new concept, and it has been in the market and around us for many, many years. It's just about probably the new thinking and the new way that people or professionals are seeing different things. So it's about almost a reflection. And sometimes I do that kind of like exercise to look back, to look at buildings, to look at projects and say, okay, if we are not calling it circular economy, but if we are reflecting about the project, how circular we were and how circular we are already. And don't be shy to tell the world about that as well, because I think we need, like the same way we need the non-success cases to learn, we also need the other ones that are very little or very small, but they need that kind of like scale. And again, because it's a global transition, we need to learn from each other. So I think that's kind of, for me, the best. It's just about,
Thank you, Anna. So Melissa, if you don't mind, super quick, because I need to wrap up. Like you've got 10 seconds.
Okay, so I'm going to jump straight to the optimism one. So I went to the last session at the World Circular Economy Forum on day one, and it was the youth talking. And there was someone from the Amazon rainforest who's lived there all her life. And she was saying about how basically she'd been at war, whether before it was with oil and gas, and now it was with mining for us to have our electric vehicles. So things don't really change for them. But she said they had to have one word, and her word was joy. Because she said, when I'm there, living there, if it didn't just give me so much joy, then I would give up and I wouldn't carry on. So it was amazing that her word in that circumstance was joy, but then also that it gave me hope for the future, because I was like, they are the future. Their language didn't have to be careful, and they were very blunt, and it was that things have to change. And so it was a joyful moment.
Thank you. And so this is a joyful moment too. I got to very briefly say thank you, Martijn, brilliant, Kira, Anna, Melissa. A wonderful panel. Thank you for what you've said. I'd also like to say a big thank you to Sammy as well, who's behind the camera, but she's been supporting. Thank you, Sammy. So final thing to say, thank you to all of you who are here and who are watching, the millions who are out there. Do repost the LinkedIn stuff so that we get this further and can make our shared understanding a bigger hour, make our bigger. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Yeah,
Also, Melissa can continue her